Hi, I'm Rick Bayless, and I've been exploring, cooking, and eating in Mexico for over 40 years. Now I'm taking you to Mexico City for a deep dive into the classic dishes you've asked to learn. It's time to share my best recipes ever.
Mexico One Plate at a Time is made possible by these funders.
Albondigas, Mexican meatballs cooked in spicy chipotle sauce. They're so old-fashioned. But so is this place that I'm at right now. I mean, all over downtown Mexico City in the Centro Histórico, the old historic center, you find places like this. This one's called Bar Mancera. Some people call it Cantina Mancera. And it has a super rich history. It was built as a private residence back in 1865. Just think about that. That was right after the French took over for their ill-fated few years of governing Mexico. And then in 1910, the same year as the Great Mexican Revolution, this was turned into a hotel. And what you're looking at right now was the bar restaurant for the hotel. When you look at their menu, even today, it's like looking at a page out of history. These albondigas, they only make them on Thursdays, and they make them in that super classic style. Like they put a piece of hard-boiled egg in the middle. They're a pork meatball that is seasoned with chopped mint. And the sauce is a roasted tomato sauce with canned chipotle, giving that sort of spicy, smoky flavor to the whole thing. I mean, this is the kind of dish that you would find in a comida corrida, that run of courses that is offered in inexpensive restaurants all over Mexico City. It's the kind of thing for people who can't go home in the middle of the day and have a proper meal. So you usually will start that with a soup followed by a plate of rice and then an entree, and that's where these chipotle meatballs would fall in. A simple dessert, and it all comes for just a couple of bucks. It's incredible, but it's incredibly satisfying because it's all homemade food. And it satisfies in a way only time-tested old-fashioned dishes can do. As you can imagine, the recipe for traditional Mexican meatballs has evolved through the years, just like this beauty that I have right here in front of me. Now, you know, I have a soft spot in my heart for young American chefs that come to Mexico, fall head over heels in love with it, and then put deep roots down here. Well, that is the perfect description for Scarlett Lindeman, who is the chef owner of this wildly successful Cicatriz cafe here in Mexico City. And she pays homage to the traditional recipe for Mexican meatballs. It's beef and pork mixed together, and she seasons it in a traditional way with a little cinnamon and black pepper and some cumin. Then she adds beautiful touches of orange peel to it, and she piles on a whole bunch of fresh herbs on the top of it, and then gives it a crowning touch of crispy leeks. It looks so delicious. I bet you wondered when I was going to get to this one. This is the meatball sandwich, or what they would call here a torta de albondigas. A little different than the meatball sandwiches in the United States. This is a meatball that's made with beef, and it is braised in a chipotle tomato sauce. The meatball is taken out, cut in half, and then put in the bread that's been smeared with a little bean puree, melted cheese over the top of that, some caramelized onions go on there, and then it's served with the braising sauce over here. This is really a delicious torta, but it's not the only reason that I brought you here. No, I think that this restaurant represents a new era in restaurants here in Mexico City. You see, a number of decades ago, it seemed like the movers and the shakers of Mexico City, they lost interest in traditional flavors. They didn't think they were worthy of a great restaurant. But now a whole lot of the young chefs are reviving their interest in tradition. They're making traditional flavored dishes, but they're making them with artisan ingredients and chef's sensibility. This place is called Público Comedor. It's the eatery within a shared workspace facility. And the chef Pablo Salas, whether he's making a torta de albondigas or maybe huevos rancheros for the people that work here, or perhaps huevos rancheros, but using a drunken salsa borracha instead of the traditional tomato sauce. Whether he's working in his super famous high-end restaurant called Amaranta or here at Público, I think he's a perfect example of someone who can bring traditional flavors to a modern era. These may look like ordinary meatballs, meaning like made from pork or a combination of pork and beef, but they're not. These are made with fish. Now that may surprise you because the idea of grinding up fish to make meatballs out of it may sound either luxurious or incredibly extravagant. But I tell you, there are a lot of places in Mexico where you find fish meatballs. So I've brought you to my favorite restaurant for fish in all of Mexico City. It's called Contramar. And let me tell you how I got started. 20 years ago, a young lady was having a beach vacation down in Cihuatanejo. Name was Gabriela Camera. And she was so taken with the beautiful simplicity of what the little beachside stands were offering, the quality of the fish, the simplicity and beauty of the presentations, that she said, can't we just bring that back to Mexico City, offer it in nice decor with impeccable service? And you know, that's what she did. And for these 2 decades, this place has just been incredibly popular. So what they do here is to grind up the fish. This one is made from robalo, snook. It's a very common fish around here. Add the binders that you would expect to find in meatballs, and then do it in a sauce that is chipotle chili, that sort of spicy, smoky chili. And then some tomato goes in there as well. Now, if you're along that western coast of Mexico where they have such an abundance of fish, you will find dishes very similar to this, or get this, sometimes they are made with shrimp, which sounds incredibly extravagant, but albondigas of shrimp around Mazatlan are a dime a dozen. So you combine that with some Mexican-style white rice, some black beans, and you've got a meal that is not only elegant, but incredibly satisfying. Now, as we've seen, the classic Mexican meatballs, the albondigas, are flavored with mint. And I've brought you to this Mexican market to show you just how much mint is for sale here. Look at this really beautiful stand of mint for using in the meatballs or other preparations as well. Now, of course, most of us, when we're thinking about the traditional Mexican kitchen, what we're thinking about is cilantro, because we use it to flavor every salsa that we make, pretty much. But just look at how much variety is available here in Mexico. I mean, there's a huge amount here of epazote, and this epazote, used a lot in central and southern Mexico, always flavors black beans or goes into quesadillas or different kinds of moles. And of course, there's a whole lot of flat leaf parsley because that also plays big and strong in making a lot of the green moles, green rice, all different kinds of preparations. But every Mexican stall like this one will always carry the hierbas de olor, the aromatic herbs, all bundled together, thyme, marjoram, and bay leaf. You add it to your stews, you add it to your stocks, and it just makes them burst forth with flavor. Sometimes you need one of your best ever recipes to be something you can get on the table in 30 minutes. And so I'm going to show you my albondigas al chipotle, the fast version of it. So I like to make it with half beef, half pork. Beef will add a beefy flavor, and the pork will add a lot of succulence and a slight sweetness to it. So I like to combine the two, but you can feel free to go with one or the other. I've got a little bit of chopped garlic that I'm going to put in with the meatball mixture here, and then this chopped mint. If you don't have mint at easy access, then I would suggest maybe cilantro or parsley could work for that. And then one of my little ringers here is to put in a little bit of chopped bacon. It makes these meatballs just a little bit richer tasting. Now, to bind everything together, I'm going to add an egg to this. And then to add tenderness, I think meatballs really do need to have something to lighten them up. So my preference is leftover rice, but a lot of people don't have leftover rice on hand, so my suggestion is that you use breadcrumbs. So breadcrumbs will give you a more uniform texture. The rice will give you a lighter texture and a lot more variety of texture in there. So I'm going to mix this all up. I think the best way to do that is with my hands. I certainly wouldn't do it in an electric mixer. I'm going to sprinkle the salt over it and then use my fingers to make sure that it gets blended in evenly. And then I'm going to form a dozen meatballs. Now for me, meatballs that are seared in a heavy pan have the best taste and texture. And I'm going to put a little bit of pork lard. Since I have a pork meatball, I'm using pork lard. You could use any kind of oil that suits your taste. And when this now melts into the pan, I'll know it's going to be hot enough that I can lay in these meatballs and then turn them until they're browned evenly on all sides. Now for the sauce for these meatballs, the chipotle sauce, I'm going to rely on canned tomatoes because that's the easiest thing, and I always have them on my shelf. I usually choose the fire roasted because they have a deeper, richer flavor, and it's a more traditional Mexican flavor as well. So I'm going to add my can of tomatoes to the blender jar like that. And then the chipotles, I'm using the ones in the can. You could use a couple of the chilies if you like spicy, which I do, so I'll put 2 of them in there. And then I like the canning juice because it has almost like a barbecue-like flavor because it's tomatoes with some vinegar and some sweet and spices and all of that. Got a couple of garlic cloves to go in there. And then I'm going to put this on the blender and make a smooth sauce, almost smooth sauce out of it. This will go directly over the browned meatballs now. Sort of pour it in and around them. This step will sear all of those flavors together. And now I'm going to turn the meatballs in the sauce just a little bit to coat them while the tomato mixture is reducing in the pan. Then I'm going to drizzle over just a little bit of chicken broth. Then cover it. Most skillets like this don't come with a cover, so you'll have to improvise. I'm improvising with a small round griddle to go over the top of it, but sometimes I'll just grab for a cookie sheet and put that over it. I'm reducing the heat to a kind of between medium and medium low, and in about 10 minutes or so, meatballs are ready to serve. Okay, I think these are about ready, so I'm gonna sprinkle salt over the top of it, and then just baste this sauce over the top of those meatballs so that they look really beautiful. I'm going to spread them out a little bit because, to tell you the truth, when I have a vessel to cook in that's this beautiful, I like to serve in it as well. So I'm going to set this out like that. Just take some leaves of cilantro and sprinkle them over the top for a pretty fresh garnish, but one that's not fussy or fancy at all. And there you have one of my best ever dishes and one of my fastest dishes. The most common type of mint that is used in Mexico is spearmint. In the United States, we tend to favor peppermint, and I've got them both growing together here, and I encourage you to do exactly the same thing so that you can use them in different things and find out which you like the best. Now, you can see that I have my mint growing in a container, and I also encourage you to do that because mint can just take over a whole garden. It grows beautifully in a container, a fairly wide container. You just have to put it in a sunny spot, water it regularly. It doesn't like to dry out at all, and a couple times during the season, give it a little organic fertilizer. Now, if you've never been to northern Baja, I tell you, you have to go. It is so fabulous. You know, that's the part of Mexico that is just south of San Diego. And when you cross the border, you come to Tijuana and Ensenada. What I love about this area is basically three things. One is all the different groups that have settled there throughout the history of northern Baja. There were the Russians and the Italians and the Japanese and the Chinese. So the flavors that you find in that part of Mexico are really different than other spots. The other thing that I like about it is the tradition of the dishes that are known from there are really different than in other parts of Mexico. It's not a place that you go for moles and pipianes or the flavors of the Yucatan. And the third thing, it is Mexico's wine region. And when you cross from Ensenada into the Valle de Guadalupe, you are into the Napa Valley of Mexico. So I'm going to show you albondigas, meatballs that are done in that northern Baja style. And it's going to be a combination of pork and finely chopped shrimp. And it's going to have some flavors that may surprise you a little bit. Things like ginger and garlic and some toasted sesame oil. And so I've got to get some of the basic preparations done. I've got to finely chop the shrimp, mince the garlic, grate the ginger, and chop up some cilantro. Now for tenderness, I'm going to add panko breadcrumbs. You can find them in lots of grocery stores, thankfully these days, because they're a really nice size breadcrumb. So I'll add that to it. I've got 1 egg here to add, and that'll help bind everything together. A little surprise flavoring, and that's just a little hint of toasted sesame oil to go in here, and then of course we have to season it with salt. So I'm going to put a teaspoon of salt in here and then mix everything together. Okay, I'm going to put our meatball mixture into the refrigerator while we move on to the sauce. You'll need a bit more chopped cilantro for the sauce, along with some sliced red onion. Now coat the bottom of a large pan with olive oil and set it over medium heat. Then add the onion. Cook the onion slowly until it's soft and slightly caramelized. Slice up some red chilies. I'm using a red Caribe chili here, but you could use red jalapenos or even some red bell pepper. Slice them in half, cut out the seed pod, and give them a rough chop. Put them into a blender jar with a couple of cans of fire-roasted tomatoes, along with the cilantro and some garlic cloves that have been cut in half. Blend all of that to the consistency of a coarse puree. Okay, it looks like to me that the onions have softened enough in this pan and I've got a little browning going on. I'll add this puree of the red chili and tomatoes to the pan. I'm going to let this cook down for a few minutes just to reduce the liquid that's in here and bring out the sweetness of the tomato. And then I'm going to add a little bit of Baja white wine. This is a Sauvignon Blanc from Viñas de Garza, one of the great wineries from there, but unfortunately not one that we see in the United States. Okay, it's really concentrated now, so I'm going to add wine, putting about a cup of it in here, and I'm going to let this simmer because of course I want to simmer the alcohol out of it, but I also want to integrate those beautiful white wine flavors into this roasted tomato and red chili sauce. I'm going to let this simmer for a little while we make the meatballs. Take the pork mixture out of the fridge and roll a portion between your palms to make each meatball and lay them on a baking sheet. You should have enough to make about 12. And now I'm going to slide these into a 400-degree oven and let them bake for about 15 minutes. The reason I'm doing these in the oven rather than browning them in a skillet is that they stay together much better. The end result is fantastic. Oh, they look beautiful and they smell so good. Now for the last couple of minutes here of their cooking, I'm going to nestle them into this sauce, just so that they can pick up some of the flavor and actually leave a little of their flavor into the sauce as well. I'll baste them with some of the sauce here. And now I think we're ready to serve. Now I like to serve them in a small dish that has enough room to contain that beautiful tomato sauce. A little bit more of the sauce over the top of it there. And then I've got a little red onion here that I can very thinly sliced. I love the flavor of this as a raw garnish on things. And then just sprinkle some over the top. And then for a final fresh garnish, I have something really special. This is the herb shiso. It's one of those Asian herbs that a lot of the chefs in Baja just absolutely adore. And this is sort of small leaf shiso, so I'm going to take just a few of these beautiful leaves here, and that will add so much aroma and flavor. And there you've got it. These are Baja shrimp and pork meatballs.
Okay, so I fired up your appetite. Some of my favorite dishes, entertaining tips, and Mexican travel inspirations. Well, now I want to hear what you have to say. Visit us at rickbayless.com/TV for recipes and a whole lot more.